Hi, this is Jim Ferrero, and this is class 6 of 9. We will be covering today things like the interview. We're going to go over the interview at length. We're going to talk about what comes right before the interview, which is the appointment letter, what you should bring to the interview, what you can expect. I'm also going to talk about relaxation techniques, which are important for you to prepare. Something you can even start practicing those relaxation techniques because you want to be relaxed. You want to make sure the stress isn't getting in the way of a successful interview. And we're going to talk about the history part of the civics question. Those are questions 45 through 49. So we're going to go through quite a few, I'm sorry, 58 through 87. I'm sorry, pages 45 through 49. So it's quite a number of those civics questions. We're going to talk at the end of the class a little bit more about how you can study on your own and why that's important. And we're going to remind you and talk about where the website is and what you can expect. So let's just get started. All right. The phone number here, 720-660-5791, is how you can ask questions at any time. If you send me a text, all I ask is you tell me who you are, and I usually get back to you the same day. If it's a really involved question or it's very difficult, I may ask if you wanted to have a Zoom call and we can get together just one-on-one privately to discuss your question. But please send me a text if you have any question at all. All right. So the interview. The interview is what happens really at the almost at the very end of this whole process of becoming a citizen. You've turned in your application. You've been practicing. You've been attending classes. You've been studying the civics questions. You've been reviewing your own application form, and you'll get a letter from the USCIS. And the letter is going to set you up for what you need to know. What time is your appointment? What date is your appointment? Where do you have to go? Maybe additional information, or they may ask specifically for you to bring certain documents. But if you read part 8, which is on page 34 of the handbook, it'll give you a good idea of the interview and how important it is. So things you do need to bring to the interview are the appointment letter, the letter that they will send to you. Make sure you bring that because you have to have that to check into the appointment. That's very important. But also you should bring a state issued ID, your driver's license, something with a photograph on it. Bring your green card. That's important too. Um, Other things you'll want to bring is your current country's passport, even if it's expired, if you still have your passport. If you don't have your passport or it's expired or whatever, it's not the end of the world, but they do like to see that passport. That's to help them look at your travel history and that sort of thing. So bring your passport. And those things, your green card, your passport, your driver's license, of course, if they take it to take a copy of it, which they will at the beginning of the appointment, the interview, they give it right back to you. All right. So you don't need to worry about that. Additionally, you ought to bring any additional documents. And if you look in part 7 of the handbook, and part 7 starts on page 27 of the handbook, that lists a bunch of documents that you can bring. And that makes things easier if they ask to see them. You can produce them right away. And again, you bring your originals. They just make a copy if they need that, and they give you back the original, so that's fine. The interview will be held at the USCIS district office. There's a number of those throughout the United States. I think there's like 39 of them. For example, here in Colorado, this is a picture of the building. Very nice building. Has covered parking. The door is kind of behind this tree right here. And when you get there, sit in your car, just kind of go, prepare yourself for the interview, look over any of your papers. And about 30 minutes before your appointment time, with the time they show, you can go ahead and go in through the door and I'll go start going into some detail about what you can expect. All right. So you show up early, make sure you aren't cutting it to, for example, if they say your appointment's at 11, plan on being there at least 10:30, if not earlier. That way it gives you time to, if there's traffic or there's problems with the roads, or you might have difficulty finding the office. I hope not, but if you do. Anyway, so that gives you time, so you're not rushed at the very end. Um, Go ahead and at the point of time when they suggest you show up, 10:30, say, for an 11 o'clock appointment, go ahead and go in through the door. They have security guards there. Those are not ICE. They're not part of the USCIS or Customs and Border Patrol police. They're just paid security guards for the building. And kind of like at the airport, they'll ask to see some ID. You show them ID. They'll probably ask you, why are you here? And you can say, I am here for my citizenship appointment. Oh, very good. You'll have to go through one of those magnetometers, the things that, you walk through and they x-ray your things in a bucket as it goes through the machine, but you walk through. It's like a metal detector for security in the building. On the other side of that, they'll give you back your things that they've x-rayed in the bucket, the basket, and they'll tell you where to go to check in. So listen to what they say and go exactly there. For example, here in Denver, the check-in was on the second floor. I think right now the check-in desk is on the first floor, but that may change. Wherever they tell you to go, you go and check in. When you walk up to the desk, you can show them your letter. You can give them your name. They'll check you in, and then that's official that you're there. All right. That person then will tell you where to go for the waiting room. Listen to their directions carefully. If you don't understand, ask them to repeat them. Here in Denver, you usually have to go up in the elevator to the second floor. There's a big waiting room there with chairs. Find yourself a chair where you can kind of look at the doors where the people come out, the USCIS people come out. There may be multiple doors. Here in Denver, I think there's 4 of them around the elevator. So if you're facing the elevator, you're looking right at them as they come out. When they come out, they usually are looking at a clipboard with a file with your name on it, and they'll call out your name. They may say, is Jim Ferrero there? And I would go, yes, I'm here. Raise my hand. I would stand up and start walking towards them. They will smile and they'll greet you, and they'll start something that in English we call it small talk. Small talk is things that are just meant to be polite. They're things like, how is the weather out there? Is it still raining? It was raining when I came to work this morning. Did you have trouble finding our office? Have you been here before? Things like that. Did anybody drive you? Did you come by yourself? Those little questions they're asking actually have a purpose. They're judging how good your English is so they know what to expect during the interview. So answer them completely. Don't just smile and nod. Give them an appropriate answer to anything they ask. How's the weather? Oh, it's still raining. Did you have trouble finding a building? No, I knew where to go. That sort of thing. Just answer the questions. And then they know, okay, this person speaks pretty good English. The interview is going to go well. They'll take you back to their office. Small offices. In the office, there's usually a desk. They have a chair behind the desk facing you. There's usually 2 chairs facing them on the other side. And they'll point to the chairs and say, you can put your things down there if you want, but remain standing. They'll close the door to the office. You remain standing, and they'll ask you to raise your right hand. And they will say, repeat after me. Or they'll raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And you say, I do, or I will. You've just made an oath to tell the truth. Oath, O-A-T-H. That may be an English word you're not familiar with. It's one that's not used very often, but oath, O-A-T-H. It's a promise. It's a commitment, and you're promising to tell the truth. kind of like the oath of allegiance, which is the oath that you take to become a citizen. That's a promise, that's a commitment. But here you're promising to tell the truth. After you say, I do, they'll say, okay, have a seat. At this point, they'll probably ask you for your driver's license and your passport, your green card, and the letter, maybe. And whatever they ask you for, give it to them. They're going to scan it in and make a copy of those things, but they'll give them right back to you. Don't worry about it. They might ask you if you know what an oath is, OATH. And you can tell them, yeah, an oath is a promise. I just promised to tell the truth. And that's why they're asking that question, just to make sure that they understand that you know that you promised to tell the truth, because it's absolutely important that from that point on, everything you say is true. Just like if you were in a court. But this is a lot less formal than a court or anything. The people who will be interviewing you are dressed just in regular dress, regular clothes. Okay. They don't wear uniforms. Um, they are not part of the same group that mans those booths at the airports or at the border that wear the uniforms. That's Custom and Border Patrol, immigration. The USCIS, the United States Customs and Immigration Service, I'm sorry, Citizenship and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. Their job is strictly to issue green cards and to make you citizens. Their job is really to help you succeed in this process. So I advise people on this that you show up early, you dress like you're going to an important job interview. All right. Um, so, I mean, you don't have to dress like you're getting married or something, but just, dress nicely. Throughout the entire thing, the time you first meet the interviewer and when they come out to the waiting room, make eye contact with them. That's something here in the United States we value very much. Is this person staring me in the face, and can I look at them in the face? That's very important. So make eye contact. Speak loudly enough for them to understand. Don't mumble. All right. And you'll know if you're speaking loudly enough. If you're not, they're going to ask you to repeat yourself. And if they've had to ask you to repeat yourself more than 2 times, speak up a little bit. You're not speaking loudly enough. Just answer the questions that they ask you. All right. Don't go off into a long background. Sometimes when we're nervous, we talk too much. All of us, we do that. Just kind of listen to the question and answer the question. Sometimes you can get by with just yes or no, but they may want to ask for more information. Like, I mean, they may very well ask you, why do you want to become a citizen? That's a good question. So think about that and have an answer ready for them. But just answer the question they ask. If they ask you about where do you live now, you would give them your address, just your address. So practice saying your address out loud, because that's probably a question they will ask. Where do you live now? Then you would give them your address. The house number, the street, the town that you live in. They may ask you, how long have you lived there? Well, you don't have to give them an exact to the day number of days, but you can say, oh, I've been there 2 years, 3 years. I moved there 3 years ago. That's a good answer, a good type of answer. So, but just answer the questions they ask you. Follow all of their instructions. When you come into their office, if they say, put your things over there, put whatever you've got in your hands or you're carrying where they told you to put them. Because that shows them you are hearing them and you understand English. So follow their instructions. Relax. Remember to breathe. And I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. And smile. When you smile, it makes you look more open, more friendly, and that's what you're trying to do. Okay. So during the interview, they will be asking questions primarily about your application, your N400. So that's why it's important that you um, have been studying your own application and you're prepared for it. You don't have to memorize the dates, the very date you moved into your current house or the date you left your last job to start the new job. But you can be general about that, the year, the month, or something like that. If they ask you a date, and for some reason you just can't remember, they ask you the date of your spouse. When was your spouse born? What's their birth date? If your mind goes blank, smile at them and say, I can't remember that right now, but they'll understand. Be honest with them. They ask you a question you don't know, it's not the end of the world. Tell them, I'm sorry, I don't know, I don't remember. That's perfectly all right. Those kind of questions they might ask about your travel outside the country. Maybe you listed 4 times or 5 times you went back to your home country. Um, they may ask a question like, why are you going to Costa Rica? Well, that's where I'm from, and I'm visiting family. So you don't have to go into great detail. I'm going because my brother's second wife is having a baby, and I wanted to be, no, just I'm going to visit family. So those are the key things to remember. The interview may be short. It might be only about 20 minutes. Okay. And of that 20 minutes, they still have to give you your civics test, which again, they're going to give up to 10 questions. You only have to get 6 right. And when you answer the 6th question right, they stop asking the civics. They go on to the English reading and the English writing. And we've talked about how that's going to go. You'll be using a tablet type device that's bolted to the edge of the desk. You'll be using a stylus to write with, right on the tablet when you're writing the sentence that they dictate to you. You can't erase, so if you make a mistake, just put an X through it and keep writing. Again, you only have to get 1 sentence right to read and 1 sentence right that you've written. So the tests may only take 5 or 7 or 8 minutes total. And then the rest of the time, they're talking about your application. At the end of your interview, um, they'll give you an indication if you've done well, you're passed, and they're going to recommend you. It's even possible they will swear you in as a citizen right then. They're doing that quite frequently now. But they are also still having ceremonies where they call certain students back into a big group and have the ceremony. And if you're called back, it's good because you get to bring your friends and your family with you. And that's always nice. Those ceremonies, I enjoy those ceremonies when I'm invited. It's really good. But sometimes they just give you the oath of citizenship right then. And that's good too. The minute you've said, so help me God, at the end of that oath of citizenship, you're as much a citizen as I am. All right. And with all the rights, all the responsibilities we talked about last week. Okay. You're going to be nervous for your interview. That's normal. That's normal for everyone. Okay. But you can kind of work to control that nervousness. One of those things is kind of just a simple matter of controlling your own breathing. Pay attention to how you're breathing. Pay attention to how you're breathing. If you're breathing a lot of short breaths, that's because you're nervous. Try to make yourself slow down. Breathe normally. Just long, slow breaths. In and out through your nose is fine. You don't have to pant or anything. But practice breathing. Before your interview, while you're in the waiting room or in your car out in the parking lot, you can really do some deep breathing exercises to help relax you. A really good one, and this is just it's called a box breathing. And What you do is you breathe in through your nose as deeply as you can, filling your lungs slowly with air. And then you hold that breath for 4 seconds, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. And then breathe out through your mouth slowly, emptying your breath. And then hold that for 4 seconds, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. And then breathe in through your nose as deeply as you can to fill your lungs, and then hold it for 4 seconds, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. And then breathe out through your mouth and hold that for 4 seconds. And do that 4 times. And you'll be amazed how just that deep breathing exercise will calm you down and relax you. Another thing you can pay attention to are your shoulders. If your shoulders are all hunched up like this, and your arms are all folded like this, which they might be because you're nervous, try to relax your shoulders. Don't cross your arms in front of you. Put your arms at your side or in your lap and kind of roll your shoulders to relax them. You know what I mean? Roll your shoulders, kind of rotate your shoulders a few times. You can do the same thing with your neck. Just roll your head slightly. Don't have to do it fast. Just slowly rotate your head and get your neck and your shoulders relaxed. Your face, you can relax by just smiling. That sounds funny, but when you smile, you're actually using a lot less muscles than if you're clenched up. Clenching. Pay attention to your teeth. Are your teeth locked down? And your knees. Kind of make sure your knees aren't all tightly bound up. Relax your knees as you're sitting there in the desk. Pay attention to your hands. Try to keep your hands away from your face. That's something that they're actually looking for. That's a sign that people aren't telling the truth when they have their hands up here. And I've said this before, and I honestly believe it, that if you look at the other person's face as they're talking, it's easier to understand what they're saying. Watch their hand gestures. So pay attention to their face and smile. Okay? Those are some relaxation techniques that you can do. But don't wait until the interview to start doing them. Practice doing them the days before your interview. Start doing them now, because you can use those relaxation techniques at any time that you feel tense or stressed. One of the things about the deep breathing, filling your lungs and then exhaling all the way out, is it's giving more oxygen to your body. And the oxygen feeds your blood, and the blood feeds your brain. You think better. All right? So those are things you can practice. There's a lot of good YouTube videos out there on relaxation. You could Google, go to YouTube and just put in, search for relaxation videos, and you'll find some. But most of them will be talking about breathing because it's something that simply works. All right. Okay. As we go getting closer and closer to the interview, and you get your letter that has the date on when your interview is going to happen, scheduled for. Say it's scheduled for August 31st at 11 o'clock in the morning. Okay, about a week or two before that, send me a text. Let me know you got your interview coming up. And if you want, we can have a one-on-one private Zoom call to go over anything you want to talk about, answer any questions you may still have, just to make sure you're totally prepared for the interview. The more you're prepared, the better you do. Also, the more you're prepared, the less you're stressed. And one of the best ways to prepare and we'll talk about that at the end of this session, on the studying though, is to really become very familiar with your own application that you sent to them, because that's the majority of the questions they will ask. Okay. Let's talk about the civics questions now. The civics questions in this next part, which is the history portion, I'm gonna, it's called American History, and it starts on page 45 in the handbook. First question is question 58. And it kind of goes through the history of the United States from the colonial period, which means when we were colonies of Great Britain. It's referred to the colonial period, when the 13 original colonies each reported back to Great Britain, to the king, all the way up to fairly recent history. And it's broken up into time frames. But I'm going to share my screen right now and share a timeline that is, I think, handy. And this timeline, let me make sure it's big enough for everyone to see, starts in, this is the date, the period, and what happened during this time. And in the 1600s and 1700s, colonists came to America. These are people who came primarily from Western Europe, the Mediterranean area and Scandinavia, and they came looking for freedom because they didn't have freedom back home in their home countries. They were looking for political liberty and economic opportunities, and for many of them, the freedom to worship as they pleased, because the religion of the state or the king, the queen or the empress at that time, was what they were demanded to worship, and that may not meet with their own personal beliefs. So they wanted freedom to be able to worship their God as they wished, and that's why they came. But there were also people who were coming in this period of time, and it wasn't their choice. Between 1619 all the way up to 1860, Africans were taken from Africa. Slave traders brought them to the beaches in Western Africa, and ships from Spain and Portugal and England picked them up and brought them to the Americas and sold them like they were property, like they were not even human beings, as slaves and the slaves had no rights, none, no rights whatsoever. And they were horribly badly treated. In fact, many of the slaves who were taken from the west coast of Africa never even made it to the Caribbean or South America or North America alive. They died on the way. But this is a dark part of our history, but it's a very important part that we need not to ever forget. But during this period of time, the colonies, the 13 original colonies, which were stretched from Georgia in the south all the way up to Massachusetts in the north, pretty much like the current states along the eastern seaboard, those colonies weren't united at this point in time. They weren't talking to each other. I mean, they knew about each other, but they were like separate countries as far as they were concerned. Each of those colonies reported directly back to Great Britain, to England, to London, to the king. They had to pay taxes, and they weren't getting anything for those taxes. They had to they had their rights really constrained. They couldn't travel without permission. They couldn't sell their goods without permission from the king. If the king sent over soldiers to those 13 colonies, many times he put the soldiers in colonists' homes. They would come pounding on the door and say, how big is your house? Here, I'm going to give you 4 soldiers. You take care of them, give them a place to sleep, and feed them. And of course, nobody liked that. Um, these things became more and more and more unbearable for the colonies. And in 1774, a war broke out that lasted all the way until 1783. All right, 9 years. And this was the Revolutionary War, or the War for Independence. 2 years after the war broke out, it became really obvious that the 13 colonies were all fighting for the same thing. They needed to have one document, one statement that they could explain why they were revolting. And on July 4th, 1776, Thomas Jefferson, who was from Virginia, about in the middle of the colonies, published the Declaration of Independence. And this is something we talked about in our first class. A declaration is something you state out loud for people to hear and pay attention to see. That was a declaration, and the word independence means freedom. So this was our Declaration of Freedom. It said we're free from Great Britain. Well, in September of 1783, the war was won, had already been won that summer, and the British conceded it. We had a treaty that was signed in Paris that was witnessed by other European countries like the Netherlands and Holland and Spain and Germany. They witnessed the terms where Britain acknowledged that the 13 original colonies were now 13 United States. It was a new country. Well, in September of 1783, George Washington was elected the first president of the US. He had also been the general fighting the Revolutionary War. Before that, he was a rich landowner in Virginia, and had even served as an officer in the British Armed Forces during the 7 Years' War, which is about 10 years earlier. All right. So George Washington became our first president. Between 1787 and 1788, well, actually, the summer of 1787, the U.S., they had the freedom. They were their own country. They needed to write the rules on how they were going to govern themselves, how they were going to define the government, how the government was going to work, and what were the basic rights of all Americans, people living here. And they did that by at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. And while they did this, the members who had been writing the Constitution got together, and they appointed John Jay, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton to write a series of essays, papers that were published under the name Publius that explained this new Constitution to the citizens and the people living here. So these Federalist Papers are really important because to this day, our Supreme Court, when they're considering what were the original intent of the writers of the Constitution, what did they mean when they wrote this Constitution? How does that apply to a current law? They usually go back to these Federalist Papers and consider them. So it's very important that these three names are that we remember them: John Jay, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton. And they all signed their names the same, Publius, to kind of give them a little bit of, they were anonymous, protected them, but also it kind of represented Publius, sounded like an old Roman senator, and that's what they were trying to do. So in 1787, as I say, the Constitution was published, and we were a country. In 1803, jumping ahead here, 1803, 16 years later, the US bought a huge tract of land from France, bought it for like $12 million, which at that point was a lot of money, but it was still a huge bargain because we got all this land from the Mississippi River all the way up to the Pacific Northwest. In fact, I'm here in Colorado right now, recording this tape, And I'm kind of in the middle of that Louisiana Purchase. It went all the way from the current state of Louisiana at the mouth of the Mississippi, west and northwest, all the way up to the Pacific Ocean. And that was the Louisiana Purchase. When we bought that in 1803, it made the United States one of the largest countries in the world at that time. It was really important. In 1812, we fought another war with Great Britain. Even though we had won the war for independence in 1783, in 1812, Great Britain was in the process of fighting wars with Napoleon and uh, other wars around, and they needed soldiers, so they were capturing people on American ships, Americans, and forcing them to become soldiers. They were restricting our trade with the people that Great Britain was fighting. So Great Britain invaded the United States. They were also afraid that the United States was going to take over Canada too, which was still their colony. So they invaded. They made it all the way into Washington. They burned the Library of Congress. They set fire to the White House. They It was a real war. People were killed. Guns went off. Cannons went off. But it was short, and we won that war. We chased Great Britain out of our country. So this was our first test as a nation on the international stage, winning this war, even with Great Britain. Well, in the 1800s, the United States fought a lot of wars. We did. Between 1846, 1848, we fought a war with Mexico. And this was the Mexican-American War. And we won that. And that gave us Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California. The major war in the 1800s was the war between the North and the South over slavery. And this was the Civil War, the war between the states, the North versus the Confederacy of 11 states in the South. During this war, on January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln, who was president, issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Emancipation is a word that means to make free, and a proclamation is a statement by a leader about what's going to happen. And what Abraham Lincoln said is, all the slaves in the South are now free as of January 1st, 1863. Well, of course, in practice, they weren't really free because the Southern states didn't recognize this until after the war. But the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. In 1898, we had the Spanish-American War, where we fought Spain for the colonies of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippines, and the South Pacific, and we won that war. That war gave Cuba its freedom. We gained Puerto Rico as one of our first territories. And we also gained the Philippines as well. There was a woman, and her name was Susan B. Anthony, and I'll talk about her in just a minute. But between 1890 and 1900, she fought very hard and advocated for women's rights. At this point in time, women couldn't vote. But she also, while she was fighting for women's rights and the right to vote, the right to own property, for women to run their own businesses and everything, equal rights, that men already had. She was also fighting for the civil rights of all people, including the Black people in the South, Hispanics, people from Mexico who were living in the Southwest. Between 1917 and 1919, there was a world war. By that, I mean, the war reached globally around into Africa, into Asia, into South Asia and India, elements of the war. Primarily, though, it was in Europe. And the United States joined that war, and Woodrow Wilson was our president. And when we joined the war, we helped Great Britain and France win the war against Germany in the First World War. Woodrow Wilson, World War I. A lot of W's there. Whoa, whoa, whoa. World War One, Woodrow Wilson. But in 1929 through 1933 was the Great Depression. And this was, again, a global depression, economic depression. Um, Stock markets crashed. People who had money and invested in the stock market lost it, and suddenly their fortunes went away. Banks closed, factories closed, people didn't have jobs. And during the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt was our president. He ended up being elected 4 different times. If he had served all those times out, he would have been president for 16 years. As it was, he was only president for 12 years because he died in the middle of his last term, Franklin Roosevelt. But he was also president because in 1941 to 1945, he was still president, and that the United States joined again our European allies, Great Britain and France and others, to fight the Germans again, as well as Japan and Italy in World War II. And that war, we were victorious again. Dwight David Eisenhower was a supreme general over all of the forces during that war, even the British and the French. And so we had a leadership role in that war. After the war, from 1945 to 1991, was something called the Cold War. And a Cold War because battles weren't raged, cannons didn't go off. It was more a war of brinksmanship, diplomacy, a war where, and a failure of diplomacy, the war of testing each other's between us and Russia, the Soviet Union. Our main concern was the spread of communism during this time. Communism had risen to power under Mao Zedong in China, under Joseph Stalin, and then Khrushchev in Soviet Union. And this huge areas, and these two very strong countries were starting to exert influence throughout the world. And that was a concern, was the spread of communism. Between 1950 and 1956 was the Korean War, and this was a war on the Korean Peninsula, northwest of Japan, in Asia. And between the North Korea, which was and still is communist, and South Korea, which is more democratic. And we fought alongside Australia and Great Britain, again, other countries that were members of the United Nations that went to support the Southern Korean government. And that war in 1956 cooled down, but it never really was resolved. So there's still a border between North and South Korea that is armed and very sensitive to incursions, and a war could break out there at any time. Between 1953 and 1961, Dwight David Eisenhower, who had been that general in World War II, became president. And he's known for a number of things, and I'll talk about him in just a minute. Between 1960 and 1968, the civil rights movement, it attempted and tried to bring equality between the races, and that's the civil rights of all men to be equal in the United States. It's still that goal is still going on. Between 1967 and 1972 was the Vietnam War. Again, we were fighting a country that was divided between the North and the South in Vietnam, North being communist, South being somewhat of a corrupt colonial type government. And eventually, because of the weakness of the Southern Vietnamese government, it fell, and North Vietnam, the communists, were victorious. So we lost that war. On September 11th, 2001, terrorists attacked the US by flying commercial jets, 747s that belong to US Airlines, United and American, I believe, into the World Trade Center in both towers, bringing those towers down. Two different jets flew into each one, and they also crashed a jet into the Pentagon. A fourth jet full of passengers was brought down in a field in Pennsylvania because the passengers rose up and against the hijackers. But that happened in September 11th, 2001, and this was a very shocking thing for the United States to have foreign terrorists. In this case, they were from Saudi Arabia, but they were adherents to um, a man called Osama bin Laden. Um, and that was a very shocking thing. And because of that war or that attack, our country changed. It really did. And the development of the Department of Homeland Security, of which the USCIS is part now, was reorganized, and flying became more difficult because of security issues that had to be observed. So that was a very significant thing. But that's the timeline. And that timeline is available to you if you want. In the class on next week, on the 21st of August, for example, it'll be in the chat box. It'll be included in the chat box. And anyway, so that this timeline helps kind of break things down in the order in which they occur. I'm going to talk about some famous Americans now because they come up in these questions in this section as well. And get this up here and make it big enough for people to see. All right. Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin. He founded the first public library back when we were still a colony in Philadelphia. He was the first postmaster Master General of the United States, and he was instrumental in setting up the U.S. Postal Service. But he helped write the Declaration of Independence. He was, even though he at the time was eventually during the Revolutionary War was eventually appointed as a diplomat. Our first diplomat to the court of King Louis in France, and he was instrumental in having France come out in support of the U.S., which helped us win the war. He was an inventor. He invented bifocal eyeglasses. He invented a type of insert that could go into a fireplace that made it generate more heat, was more efficient. He invented a musical instrument called a glass harmonica that Mozart wrote music for. He was a brilliant man. He also was the first to understand what the phenomenon of lightning was, that it was actually an electrical charge. So he was a scientist. He was a man of letters. He wrote books and published them. It was brilliant. He was the oldest member of the Continental Congress or the Constitutional Congress, excuse me, that wrote the Constitution. He was the oldest member of that. He was brilliant. He's one of those people in history I personally would love to have met. He just sounded like a fascinating person. A contemporary, somebody who was alive at the same time, was George Washington. George Washington, which I talked about earlier, was the general during the Revolutionary Army. Before that, he was a soldier and he was a surveyor, but he was also a very wealthy landowner because he married one of the richest women in the colonies, Martha Washington, his wife. They had huge land holdings along the Potomac and the Chesapeake River, between the Potomac and the Chesapeake in Virginia. He's called the father of our country because he was the first president. He He was also the general in the Continental Congress. He was the president of the Constitutional Convention that wrote the Constitution. George Washington. Thomas Jefferson, who was his fellow person from Virginia, representative to the Constitutional Convention, as well as one of the framers of the Articles of Confederation of the Colonies. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was our third president, after John Adams was our second. And he doubled the size of the US by buying the Louisiana Purchase. He was Secretary of State under George Washington when he was president. But the thing that Thomas Jefferson, at the end of his life, was most proud of was that he had founded the University of Virginia. He felt that was more important than anything else he had done, even though he had done all these things. James Madison was the fourth president after Thomas Jefferson. James Madison, he actually wrote most of the Constitution, so he's called the father of the Constitution. He was our fourth president. He was president during the War of 1812, and he was one of the writers of the Federalist Papers who signed his name Publius. Another writer of the Federalist Papers was Alexander Hamilton. You may have heard of the musical on Broadway, Hamilton, which was about him. He was the first Secretary of the Treasury, a brilliant man. He was an immigrant who came to this country as a teenager from Jamaica, came by himself and to put himself into university. But instead of going into university because the Revolutionary War was going on, he forced an introduction to George Washington. Keep in mind, he's a teenager. And George Washington was so impressed with his intellect and his knowledge and his thinking that he made him his chief aide during the Revolutionary War. Probably a genius, really. He was one of the writers of the Federalist Papers. He helped establish the concept of the first bank in the U.S. He was an aide to George Washington during the Revolutionary War, and he was a member of the Continental Congress representing New York State. Jumping ahead to the middle of the 1800s, Abraham Lincoln was a president. He was our 16th president, and he's the one who wrote the Emancipation Proclamation that freed the slaves. He's credited with saving our Union, keeping the North and the South as one country, as the United States, because he led the U.S. in the Civil War and was victorious in that war. Susan B. Anthony was a brilliant woman who was a writer and a public speaker in the 1890s. Before women could vote, she ran for president. She was a noted public speaker, and people would spend days traveling just to hear her speak. Brilliant woman. Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was president during World War I. He was an academic. I mean, he taught in colleges, and he was the president of Princeton when he became president of the United States, and he was president during World War I. He was one of the leaders of the Paris Peace Conference in 1917, and he was an advocate for the League of Nations, which became eventually the United Nations. During World War II, the president was Franklin Roosevelt. He was president during the Great Depression and World War II. He successfully led the U.S. out of the Depression, got us out of the economic depression, and successfully led us through World War II. He was elected for 4 terms in office. Dwight David Eisenhower was the general during World War II. He was also president during the Korean War. He was our 34th president. And the thing he's most noted for is he had a vision for interconnecting all of the states with interstate highways, for separated multi-lane highways that would make transportation for goods and people much easier between the states. Martin Luther King, another person from history I would like to have met, was a young man, but he fought for civil rights. He worked for the equality of all Americans, and he worked to ensure that people would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. A worthy goal. And he was assassinated for that in 1967 in his 30s. So those are our key famous Americans, things to kind of keep in mind. Okay, I am going to share. I am going to share my screen again and bring up the civics test. And we're going to go to move ahead. Done all this already. Rights and responsibilities were last week to American history. And this, if you have your handbook, you can pull it out and go along with me, study along with me. And we're going to go through the questions from 58 through 87, I believe. All right. So during the colonial period, again, colonial means we were colonies of Great Britain. During the colonial period and the War for Independence, that's the first section. Question 58, what is one reason colonists came to the America? Just one. You only have to give one. And if you say freedom or political liberty or religious freedom, economic opportunity to escape persecution, to practice their religion, any of these will be accepted as right. Freedom is probably the easiest one to remember, but I leave that to you. So who lived in America before the people from Europe, Western Europe, arrived? American Indians or Native Americans. Either one of those is correct. And what group of people were taken to America and sold as slaves? Africans or people from Africa. Why did the colonists fight the British? So why did the 13 colonies fight the British for the Revolutionary War? Well, high taxes. And they had taxation, but they had no representation in Parliament. So they weren't getting anything for their taxes. The taxes were all going to the crown to support the wars the king fought, but nothing was brought back to the United States to make our country better, those 13 colonies. Also, British Army were forced to stay in their houses, boarding and quartering, and that was very unpopular. And they fought because they didn't have self-government, which was very important to them. They wanted to be able to make their own decisions. In 1776, who wrote the Declaration of Independence? Jefferson, or you could say Thomas Jefferson. When was the Declaration of Independence adopted? July 4th, 1776. So there were 13 original states. You're asked to name 3. You only have to name 3 of the 13 original states. They started down south in Georgia, and then South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. At this point in time, Maine was actually part of Massachusetts. So that's why Maine wasn't one of the original 13. And the reason Vermont isn't one of the original 13 is Vermont chose to pursue their own independence, and they became part of the states after the 13 colonies were granted their freedom in the Treaty of Paris, 1783. So just look over this list of 13 states and pick 3 or 4 that you can remember. Maybe you want to go with the new ones like New Hampshire, New York, New Jersey. Anyway, I'll leave it up to you which ones you will name. So this is a question where they give you the answer in the question. What happened at the Constitutional Convention? Well, the Constitution was written, or the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution. When was the Constitution written? They wrote it in the summer of 1787 in Philadelphia. And you remember me talking about the Federalist Papers. So between 1787 and 1788, these essays were written, the Federalist Papers were written by three men, Madison, Hamilton, or Jay, and they all signed their name Publius. Now, you're asked to name one of the writers. So you can name Madison, Hamilton, Jay, but if you say Publius, that's right too. What is one thing Benjamin Franklin is famous for? Well, he was the U.S. diplomat to France during the Revolutionary War and was responsible for convincing the King of France to support this colony who was pursuing freedom. He was the oldest member of the Constitutional Convention. He was the first Postmaster General of the United States. He was a writer of Poor Richard's Almanac, and he started the first free public libraries in Philadelphia. Who was the father of our country? Washington, George Washington. Who was the first president? Washington again, George Washington. Getting up into the 1800s. What territory did the United States buy from France in 1803? What territory did the United States buy from France in 1803? And this is that body of land that went all the way from where the mouth of the Mississippi, where Louisiana is, up along the Mississippi River and west to the Pacific Northwest. Huge amount of land that resulted in the United States over doubling its area. And this was the Louisiana Territory, or the Louisiana Purchase. Name one war fought in the 1800s. Well, you could say the War of 1812. That's an easy one to remember. The most important one, of course, was the Civil War. But also the Mexican-American War was very important, as well as the Spanish-American War, because of the territories that we won. Name the U.S. war between the North and the South. Well, that was the Civil War. But if you said the war between the states, that would also be correct. Name one problem that led to the Civil War. Slavery. These other reasons, economic reasons and states' rights, tie back into slavery. So slavery is the primary problem. The southern states, their whole economy was based on being able to have labor that didn't cost them anything. They're slaves to pick their cotton. And cotton was what drove the economies of the South. Cotton, like fabric, but it's the thing that grows on a cotton plant. And it grows real close to the ground, and it's back-breaking hard labor to pick the cotton bolls off those little bushes that are so close to the ground. You have to spend all day long basically bent double, pulling big bags full of this cotton that you picked. It's grueling labor in the hot sun of the summer in the South. And they used slave labor to do that, and that was the economic reasons. The northern states had long since decided not to allow slavery. In fact, Great Britain, Mexico, Brazil, Canada, France, Spain, all these countries, they did away with slavery in the 1830s, 1840s. So the United States didn't do away with it till the 1860s. And the reason we didn't do away with it is the 11 southern states, because of their economy growing cotton, needed the free labor. If they had to pay people to do this backbreaking work, their economies would fail, and they did. States' rights, and that means that the states have a right to say that slavery is legal. It's not up to a northern state to say a southern state, you can't do that. Well, that's what the Civil War was fought over, slavery. What is one important thing that Abraham Lincoln did? One, Well, he was president, 16th president. He freed the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation. He saved the Union. He kept the United States together by winning the Civil War, which he led. And what did the Emancipation Proclamation do? Again, emancipation means to make free. A proclamation is a statement that a leader issues. This is what's going to happen. And on January of 1863, Lincoln, in the middle of the Civil War, said, slaves are free. He freed the slaves. What did Susan B. Anthony do? Well, she fought for women's rights and she also fought for civil rights. And by fought, I mean she advocated. She had fiery speeches that changed people's minds, and a very powerful woman. Name one war that was fought by the United States in the 1900s. Okay, so the 1800s, we listed those wars, and this is the list of wars that the United States fought in the 1900s. World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, or the Gulf War. So those are all the wars that we fought in the United States fought in the 1900s. Who was president during World War I? All those W's, World War I, Woodrow Wilson. Okay. Who was president during the Great Depression and World War II? Franklin Roosevelt. Who did the United States fight in World War II? We fought Japan, Germany, and Italy. Before he was president, Eisenhower was a general. What war was he a general in? World War II. During the Cold War, what was the main concern of the United States? The spread of communism. What is a movement that tried to end racial discrimination? It was the Civil Rights Movement. What did Martin Luther King do? He fought for civil rights. What major event happened September 11th, 2001 in the United States? Terrorists attacked us. Terrorists attacked the United States by flying planes full of innocent passengers, commercial airlines. Name one American Indian tribe. We didn't talk about this, but there's something like 500 recognized tribes. They'll have a complete list available to them. You can name any tribe you know, but here are some suggested answers you can give that they will be prepared to accept without having to look them up. So think about things that are maybe easy to remember, like the Pueblo tribe, or the Cherokee, or the Navajo, or the Cheyenne, or the Arapaho. Anyway, these are tribes. The Inuit up in Alaska, all the way down to the Sequoia, the Seminole here, the Seminoles, which were in Florida. So cover the entire continental United States and Alaska. And those are the civics questions. If you have a question about any one of those as you're reading over them and you don't understand or it's not clear to you or you don't really know why is this important, send me a text and I'll be glad to explain it. All right. Okay. I want to talk again about how to study. And I would really suggest you look at page 50, I believe it's how to study, page 62, how to study and prepare. Read over that. Again, it's important that you study on your own, not just rely on these classes, but you can use the handbook. You can use your own, basically the materials you need are the handbook and your own application to study. How much do you need to study? Well, I think as at the very beginning, 3 times a week and maybe only 30 minutes of time should be enough. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of effort. You just need to take small little bites. You know, the joke, how do you eat an elephant? A lot of small little bites. And that's what we're doing here. We're going to break it down. So you're going to have 30 minutes. And let's say during that 30 minutes, you have three 10-minute sessions, parts, three 10-minute parts. The first 10 minutes, let's review the civics questions. But don't try to review all 100, maybe only 10 of them at a time. And pretty soon, in 10 study sessions, you'll have gone through all civics and you can start over again. So 10 minutes and just do 10 or 12 or however many you're comfortable with of the civics questions. The second 10 minutes of your 30 minutes, look at the list that's in part 10 for the English on page 53. Look at those words and go through those. But again, don't try to go through all of them. First off, most of those words that are listed in part 11 in the handbook, and those are the only words they will use for the English tests, the reading and the writing. They aren't going to use any other words. Most of those are simple, short little words that you already know. So just go through and circle the words that you're not that comfortable spelling, or you don't quite know what it means, or you don't know what it would sound like if somebody else said it. So just circle those, and those are the ones you study. And again, don't try to study all of them at once. Just study 10 or 5, whatever. And then the third 10 minutes, use it on your application, your N400. Again, don't try to do the whole thing. Just do maybe 1 or 2 pages. But look at the questions. Understand the questions. If you understand the questions they are asking in the N400, it'll be easier for you to remember what your answer was, and you'll do well. So that's what I would recommend. Start off with 3 days, and then as you get closer to the end of your time, the interview is getting ready to happen, increase them at 4 days, 5 days a week. But just 30 minutes is all you need to study. And if you do that, you're going to be very well prepared. All right. I promise you. The website, and if you look at the introduction to the handbook, it lists the website, www.uscis.gov, G-O-V, and that's very important. It's not .com or .org, it's .gov /N400. And that's spelled out in the introduction of your handbook. That website has a lot of good information on it. That's where you can download clean new copies of your N400 if you're going to do it by hand and send it in. You can read over the instructions there. You can change your address, which I strongly recommend you doing, so it's current with the USCIS. So the website's very important. With that, that's what I wanted to cover tonight. The civics questions, the questions about, and then the issues about what to expect on the interview, those are very important. But if you want to talk more about it, just send me a text and we'll have a one-on-one Zoom, just you and me, and we'll make sure you're comfortable with those things. All right. Well, that's today's class, and thank you very much. I appreciate what you're doing. I know how expensive it is. I know how hard it is, but what you're doing is going to be well worth it, not just for you, but for your kids and your grandkids and those that come after you. My grandfather became a citizen. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing. Good night.